Here's your one thing for today. I want you to have self-respect. And I want you to have self-respect in a lot of good ways, but I also want you to have a high degree of self-respect for your weaknesses. A high degree of self-respect for your weaknesses. Respect your weaknesses. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about, honoring them and putting them up on a pedestal and, hey, aren't I so weak? Wonderful. That's not what I mean. I mean, you got to really respect the reality that this weakness can hurt you. Okay. If somebody is an alcoholic, for example, they really need to respect their weakness if they put themselves in, a situation that might be tempting. It's interesting, the Bible that I can think of, maybe it's in there somewhere. I don't know where it ever says resist temptation. You know what it actually literally says is it says flee temptation. So it's not like, I'm going to get really close to this bad thing, but I'm going to have the willpower to resist it. No. Respect your weaknesses that you could give in and flee. Go the other direction. Now, that's a really important thing. If you've got some weakness in some relationship or weakness in some other scenario or whatever it is, we need to respect that. Now, the second thing is after we respect something, our weaknesses, then one of the things I like to tell people is you got to quarantine that weakness. In other words, when we quarantine somebody, we quarantine them because we don't want them infecting somebody else. Well, your weaknesses can affect you or a situation. And so we got to quarantine them. And we got to make sure that they don't get out of hand. I'll give you an example from my own life. I am horrible about one thing that's kind of a good thing, a strength, right? I love to take on things. I like to start things. I like new ideas and creating this, and let's go do this, and we can do this, and we can do this. That's a good thing. But my weakness is that I just oftentimes don't take into account how much work that's going to be and how much stress it's going to put on the system and the capacity of the infrastructure of, everything. And one of my best associates I've ever had, and just did a lot of great things when we worked together. Her job was to quarantine my tendency to go say yes to a bunch of good things and go do this and go do that was going to really, really overtax the system. And so I had to be accountable to her. Even though she worked for me, I had to be accountable to her, in terms of, quarantining that weakness. And I said, I'm not going to say yes to a new thing until, I come run it past you, see if you guys can handle it. So it could be maybe you got, you're trying to lose weight. Well, don't think you can have all that crap in the house, the chips and all that kind of stuff, and somehow resist temptation. Quarantine that weakness and don't let the stuff come into the house. If you're going to give in some way to some manipulation of some toxic person, quarantine that weakness. You can't stand up to them yet. You're not ready for that. Then quarantine that and make sure you always got somebody with you or don't go around them. Whatever it is, you have a tendency to overspend. You got credit cards. Well, I'm not going to do it this month because I still want it because, I'm getting the miles and I want, some people shouldn't have a credit card. They should have a debit card because the money's not there. That purchase isn't going to go through it. So you have to quarantine that. Like Dave Ramsey says, cut those things up until you're out of debt. Well, his view, not only cut them up till you're out of debt, but never own one. So you got to look at, and we all have to look at, what are our weaknesses? First thing we do is we embrace those and surrender them to God. He said, blessed are the poor in spirit. We have an inability. The best thing we can do, first of all, is to quarantine that inability by getting help from God. And then we also have to realize, as Romans 12 says, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to, but have a sane estimation of yourself. So we all have to look at, what do I have a tendency to not be able to do yet? Well, I need to quarantine that tendency because it's going to get me in trouble. All right? So respect your weaknesses. One thing.